All right, so we're diving into a story today that's, well, it's pretty messed up, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think it'll stick with you for a while.
Yeah, definitely a case that makes you think.
It's about this guy, Luigi Mangione.
See, what gets me about this case is just how strange it all is. You have this young guy, right? Seems like he had it all.
Oh, yeah, from what we've been reading about him.
Yeah.
Total opposite of what you'd expect with, someone accused of murder.
Exactly. Good family, went to all the right schools, doing well for himself in the tech world, and then suddenly, boom, accused of being an assassin. Like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
It's nuts.
It really is.
So to figure out how this all went down, got to rewind a bit, go back to the beginning.
Back to the good old days.
Right. And the sources paint a picture of, honestly, almost a perfect life, at least on paper.
Like something out of a movie.
Top student, athlete, even built a mobile app while still in high school.
Driven, clearly. Sounds like he had that fire in him.
Yeah, and from what people who knew him back then say, it wasn't just about checking boxes, He really seemed to love learning, had a real passion for tech.
That's what makes this whole thing even more bizarre. Like, what happened? Where did it all go wrong?
Right. It's like a switch flipped somewhere along the way.
Absolutely.
And don't even get me started on his family background.
Oh, yeah, the Manlionis. We dug into that.
Yeah.
Wow.
We're talking, like, Baltimore royalty here.
No kidding.
Country clubs, a whole nursing home business, even a radio station, the politically conservative kind.
And a cousin in Maryland House of Delegates.
Influential family, the kind of people you read about on the society pages, not, true crime stories.
Definitely not the kind of folks you expect to be caught up in something like this. And from what we gathered, the people who knew them were just floored when the accusations came out. Total shock.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, you look at all that and then you have this alleged assassination. It just doesn't add up.
Exactly. You'd think if there were any red flags, someone would have noticed something.
Right.
Right?
Well, about 6 months before the murder, things start to change. Our sources show he basically went off the grid, stopped talking to friends, family, even missed a close friend's wedding after saying he'd be there.
Ghosting everyone. That's never a good sign.
Yeah, and it all seems to line up with when this awful back pain started for him. Like chronic, debilitating pain.
It makes you wonder if maybe all that pressure to be perfect, to live up to his family's legacy, was eating at him, and then the pain on top of that.
Could be. It's definitely not easy being in your early 20s, killing it professionally, and then suddenly you're basically crippled by pain.
Had to take a toll on him. And we see that reflected in what he was doing online. Lots of research into chronic pain, self-help books, even showed some pretty graphic images of his back surgery to a friend.
Wow.
Yeah, clearly not just a physical thing. This was affecting him deeply, emotionally, mentally.
Makes you think about what was going on in his head.
For sure.
And then, almost out of the blue, he packs up and moves to Honolulu. Ends up in this co-living space called Surf Break.
Co-living, huh? So for people who aren't familiar, it's basically like adult dorms, but fancier.
Yeah, exactly. Private rooms, but you share common spaces, kitchens, stuff like that.
Designed for like remote workers and digital nomads, right? The whole community vibe.
That's the idea. So here he is, escaping to paradise, hoping for a fresh start, I guess. But even in Hawaii, the pain followed him. And from what we've seen, there might have been something else brewing under the surface, too.
Like what?
A sense of, disillusionment, maybe.
Interesting. What makes you say that?
Well, his online activity starts to get kind of strange around this time. Still looking for answers about his pain, but also getting really into social critiques, philosophers who question the system. Even left this really thought-provoking review of the Unabomber's manifesto on Goodreads.
Hold on, the unabomber? As in Ted Kaczynski?
Yeah.
The terrorist?
Yeah, that guy.
Wow, that's unexpected.
Right. He didn't condone the violence, but he agreed with some of Kaczynski's criticisms of society, like how technology was dehumanizing us.
So you have this tech enthusiast finding common ground with a guy who basically saw technology as evil.
It's weird, right? Almost like he was battling these huge philosophical questions while dealing with all this personal pain and disappointment.
A lot going on in his head.
Yeah, and then just as things start to get really interesting, poof, he disappears. No more communication after April 15th, 2023. No explanation, no goodbyes, just gone.
And it's during this time that the alleged assassination happens.
Right in the middle of it all. A suppressed pistol, broad daylight, calm, calculated, and get this, the bullet casings. They had words on them, like deny and delay.
Almost like a message. Definitely suggests a specific motive.
And that motive seems to point directly at the healthcare industry. The victim was Brian Thompson, CEO of UnitedHealthcare, one of the biggest health insurance companies out there.
Whoa. So we're talking about a possible connection between Mangioni's chronic pain, his disillusionment, and this targeted attack on a major player in the healthcare system.
It's a lot to unpack, and it leads to a pretty big question. Could this seemingly brilliant young man, battling with pain and disappointment, have become a cold-blooded killer?
And if so, was it personal, or was there something more to it, something that speaks to a wider frustration with the healthcare system?
To get some answers, we have to look at the most puzzling piece of evidence. A handwritten manifesto they found in Mangion's stuff.
Ah, the manifesto.
Yeah.
This might give us a glimpse into his headspace in those last few months, maybe even explain his actions.
All right, let's dive into this manifesto and see what we can find.
This manifesto, well, it's unsettling, to say the least. 262 words, all handwritten, and it raises more questions than it answers, really.
Yeah, the whole thing starts with him basically admitting to the murder. Just like that. It's chilling.
Chilling is right. No emotion, just straight to the point. But then he goes on this rant about UnitedHealthcare, the whole American healthcare system, actually.
Yeah, and he's not subtle about it. Draws a direct line between their profits and how life expectancy in the U.S. has basically stalled out.
But here's the thing. He's very specific about saying it was all him. To save you a lengthy investigation, I state plainly that I wasn't working with anyone, he writes. It's almost like he's trying to control the story even now, making sure he's seen as this lone wolf, not part of something bigger.
That's an interesting point. It's like he planned this whole thing down to how people would perceive him afterward.
Exactly. And the language he uses, it's powerful, almost poetic in a dark, twisted way.
I know what you mean. When he talks about companies that continue to abuse our country for immense profit because the American public has allowed them to get away with it, you can just feel the anger, the frustration pouring out of the page.
Yeah, and the crazy part is how some people actually resonated with that. Remember, before they knew who he was, social media was blowing up. Some people were actually praising the shooter, calling him a hero for, standing up to the system.
I remember that. It was unsettling.
It was. And it speaks to how deeply frustrated people are with healthcare in this country. The costs, the fight for coverage, the feeling that profits matter more than people's lives. It all breeds resentment.
And in Mangioni's case, you have to wonder if that resentment, combined with his own pain and struggles, just pushed him too far.
It's a possibility, but we got to be careful here. Just because his words resonated with some doesn't mean his actions were justified.
Absolutely. Condemning a system is one thing. Violence is never the answer.
Exactly. And we can't forget that this is one guy, one story. It's not fair to suggest that everyone who's angry about healthcare is going to snap like this.
Right. But it does raise some important questions. Where do we draw the line between protest and violence? What happens when people feel like they have no other options? How do we fix a broken system without resorting to something like this?
Big questions. Questions that go way beyond this case, We're talking about justice, equality, the whole fabric of society.
It's heavy stuff. And when you step back and look at Mangioni's story, it's not just about a crime, right? It's about privilege, about pain, about the potential for darkness that we all have inside us.
We've seen the success, the good family, the achievements, but underneath all that, there is obviously a struggle going on, a search for meaning, a battle with pain, both physical and, existential. And at some point, things went horribly wrong.
We've gone through his upbringing, his accomplishments, his struggles, his own words, but it still feels like we're missing something. Did he snap because of the pain? Did his anger at the healthcare system twist into some messed up sense of justice? Was it revenge, a cry for help, or something else entirely?
Tough questions. And as we wrap up this deep dive, you're going to stick with us. Let's see if we can make some sense of this whole thing, bring it all together.
Man, we've been through a lot with this case. So much information. And yet it feels like we're still trying to put the pieces together.
I know what you mean. We started with this picture of a guy who had it all, and now we're here talking about murder, pain, and, well, despair.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. We've looked at the evidence, we've read his manifesto, but Luigi Mangione's story, it still feels as a mystery. Was it the pain that drove him to this? Did his anger at the healthcare system turn into some kind of twisted revenge plot?
So many questions.
We know he pleaded not guilty, and the legal process is going to play out. But beyond all that, there's this human element we can't ignore. How does someone with so much potential, so many opportunities, end up accused of something so awful?
Yeah, how do you go from valedictorian to, accused assassin. Were there signs that people missed?
And I think that's the most disturbing part of all of this. It reminds us that we can never really know what's going on inside someone's head, no matter how close we think we are to them.
We see the good stuff, the achievements, the perfect Instagram posts, but underneath there could be a whole world of pain and darkness that we just don't see.
There's this moment in the court transcripts. During his arraignment, the judge asks if he's in contact with his family.
Oh yeah, what did he say?
Until recently, is all he said. Just a small detail, but you have to wonder what that means. Were his relationships falling apart? Was he isolating himself?
Makes you think.
It does. And I think what we've learned through this whole deep dive is that it's not just about a crime. It's about so much more. It's about privilege, about the struggles we all face, about how fragile we can be.
Totally. It shows how ambition and despair can get all tangled up, how even the most seemingly perfect life can hide some really dark secrets.
And it reminds us that mental health is complicated. The signs aren't always clear.
That's the point, right? We might never know for sure what pushed Luigi Mangione to do what he allegedly did. But exploring his story, it makes us question things, makes us look deeper.
Makes us realize that everyone is fighting a battle we might not know anything about. And it makes you think, what can we do to help?
Exactly. Be more empathetic, more compassionate. Reach out to people. We can't change what happened, but maybe by learning from this, we can try to prevent something like this from happening again.
So as the legal stuff plays out, let's remember that there's a real person at the center of all this. A story that's way more complicated than any headline can capture. Let's challenge how we think about success, about failure, about mental health.
It's not always easy, but it's important.
Yeah, it's about understanding that life isn't always a straight line. There are twists and turns, unexpected detours that can lead us down some pretty dark paths.
Sometimes the journey takes you to places you never thought you'd end up.
And sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from the answers, but from the questions that linger long after the story is told.
Well said.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening.